If you think you've heard every heartbreaking animal story, wait until you discover what Father William found on the steps of his church that cold October night. The rain hammered against the stained glass windows of St. Mary's Church in Cedar Falls, Iowa, like bullets against armor. Father William Murphy pulled his worn coat tighter as he made his final rounds, checking that every door was locked, every candle extinguished. At 62, these late-night routines had become second nature. 23 years serving this small parish had taught him that peace came only after everything was secure. The old wooden floors creaked under his feet as he approached the main entrance. Cedar Falls wasn't the kind of town where crime was common, but lately there had been reports of vandalism at churches across the county. Kids with too much time and too little guidance, the sheriff had said. Father Murphy understood desperation better than most. It was written in the faces of his parishioners every Sunday, etched by economic hardship and family struggles that seemed to multiply with each passing season. He was reaching for the heavy brass lock when he heard it. A sound so faint, so fragile, that for a moment he thought it was just the wind playing tricks through the church rafters. But there it was again. A cry that seemed to come from somewhere deep in the soul. A sound that spoke of exhaustion beyond the physical. Father Murphy paused, his weathered hand frozen on the door handle. In his years of ministry, he had learned to distinguish between different kinds of calls for help. This wasn't the demanding yowl of a hungry stray or the territorial screech of cats in conflict. This was something else entirely. A plea so desperate it made his chest tighten with recognition. He pulled open the heavy wooden door, and the October wind rushed in, carrying with it the scent of wet leaves and something else, something that made him step back instinctively. The church porch light cast long shadows across the stone steps, and there, huddled against the base of the largest pillar, was a sight that would haunt him for the rest of his life. A cat lay crumpled like a discarded prayer book, its fur matted and dark with rain. But it wasn't the animal's obvious exhaustion that made Father Murphy's breath catch in his throat. It was the way the creature looked at him. Those eyes held an intelligence, a depth of suffering that seemed almost human. The cat didn't try to run or hide. Instead, it lifted its head with tremendous effort and released another one of those soul-deep cries. Father Murphy had seen plenty of stray animals in his time. Cedar Falls was surrounded by farmland, and it wasn't uncommon for cats and dogs to wander into town looking for food or shelter. But this was different. This cat wasn't asking for a meal or a warm place to sleep. This cat was asking for something much more profound. It was asking for salvation. The priest knelt on the wet stone steps, ignoring the cold seeping through his pants. Up close, the animal's condition was even more alarming. Its ribs were visible through thin fur, and there were marks on its body that made Father Murphy's jaw clench with anger. These weren't the random scratches of outdoor life. These were deliberate, systematic signs of abuse. "Easy there, friend," he whispered, extending his hand slowly. "Nobody's going to hurt you anymore." The cat's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. Instead of shying away, it tried to move closer, its legs shaking with the effort. That's when Father Murphy noticed something that made his blood run cold. The animal was protecting something. Its body was curved in a defensive posture, sheltering whatever lay beneath it from the rain and cold. As he leaned closer, trying to see what the cat was guarding so fiercely, a car door slammed somewhere in the distance. The sound echoed through the empty street like a gunshot, and both the priest and the cat froze. Father Murphy looked up to see headlights cutting through the darkness, moving slowly down Maple Street, as if the driver was searching for something. Or someone. The cat's eyes widened with what could only be described as terror, and it tried to press itself even closer to the church wall. Father Murphy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October weather. Whoever was in that car, this cat was afraid of them. Desperately, completely afraid. The headlights paused at the intersection, the engine idling ominously in the night air. Father Murphy could feel his heart pounding as he made a decision that would change everything. Without another thought, he scooped up the trembling cat, feeling the shocking lightness of its malnourished body, and rushed through the church doors. As he closed and locked the entrance behind him, he heard the car's engine rev and fade into the distance. But the question remained: what had this cat been through, and what was it protecting with such desperate determination? The answers would prove more shocking than Father Murphy could ever imagine. Inside the warmth of St. Mary's, Father Murphy's hands shook as he carried the exhausted cat toward the small room behind the altar. that served as both his office and emergency supplies storage. The animal hadn't struggled during the rescue. If anything, it seemed to understand that it had found sanctuary at last. Under the soft glow of his desk lamp, the full extent of the cat's condition became clear, and Father Murphy had to grip the edge of his desk to steady himself. This wasn't just neglect. This was systematic cruelty. The cat's fur had been cut in irregular patches, leaving raw, infected skin exposed. There were small puncture wounds along its sides, too precise and evenly spaced to be accidental. "Dear God," he whispered, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "What did they do to you?" But the cat wasn't looking at him anymore. Its attention was focused entirely on something else. The small bundle it had been protecting was still clutched against its chest. Father Murphy watched in amazement as the animal deliberately moved aside to reveal what it had been guarding with its life. 3 tiny kittens, no more than a few weeks old, lay nestled together. They were so small, so impossibly fragile, that Father Murphy couldn't understand how they had survived the cold and rain. 2 were clearly weak, but breathing steadily. The third, however, wasn't moving at all. The mother cat looked up at Father Murphy with an expression that transcended species. It was a look of desperate hope, mixed with the terrible knowledge that she had done everything she could and it might not be enough. She nudged the still kitten with her nose, then looked back at the priest as if asking him to perform the kind of miracle that her faith in this sacred place had led her to believe was possible. Father Murphy had delivered last rites to parishioners, had held hands with families as they said goodbye to loved ones, had spoken words of comfort in the face of loss that seemed senseless and cruel, but he had never felt the weight of such raw, desperate hope as he did in that moment, looking into the eyes of a mother who had brought her babies to God's house because she had nowhere else to turn. Working with the gentle efficiency that came from years of tending to his community's needs, Father Murphy gathered supplies: clean towels, a heating pad he kept for winter emergencies, the first aid kit that every country priest learned to stock well. His movements were careful and deliberate. He had helped with enough farm emergencies to know the basics of animal care. The mother cat watched his every move, but she didn't try to stop him. When he gently lifted the motionless kitten, she actually seemed to nod, as if giving her permission. Father Murphy had seen this kind of trust before in the eyes of parishioners who came to him when they had exhausted every other option. It was the trust of someone who had decided to believe in grace, even when all evidence suggested that grace had forgotten about them. As he worked to warm the tiny kitten, using techniques he remembered from helping with farm animals in his younger days, he began to notice other things about the mother cat's condition. The cuts in her fur weren't random. They formed patterns, letters. Someone had been carving words into this animal's skin, using her as a canvas for their cruelty. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had heard about this kind of thing in the news, animal abuse that went beyond neglect, that crossed into the realm of deliberate torture. But seeing it in person, in his own church, made him understand why this cat had sought sanctuary here. She hadn't just been looking for shelter from the storm, she had been looking for protection from monsters. A soft, mewing sound interrupted his thoughts. The tiny kitten in his hands was moving, its mouth opening in a silent cry. Father Murphy felt tears he didn't realize he had been holding back spill down his cheeks as he carefully returned the baby to its mother. The cat immediately began to clean her kitten, her rough tongue working with an efficiency that spoke of powerful instinct and deeper love. But their reunion was interrupted by a sound that made both priest and cat freeze, the distinct crunch of gravel under tires in the church parking lot. Father Murphy looked at his watch. It was nearly midnight. No one had any reason to be at St. Mary's at this hour unless... The mother cat's reaction was immediate and terrifying. She began to tremble, her eyes darting toward the windows as if she expected danger to crash through the glass at any moment. Her body curved protectively over her kittens again, and she looked at Father Murphy with an expression that was unmistakably a plea: "Hide us." Father Murphy moved to the window and carefully pulled back the curtain. In the parking lot, a dark pickup truck sat with its engine running. He couldn't see the driver clearly, but there was something menacing about the way the vehicle just sat there, waiting. The headlights were off, but he could see the faint glow of a cigarette inside the cab. Whoever was in that truck was watching the church. Father Murphy's mind raced. The cat's terror, the systematic abuse, the timing of this midnight visitor. It was all connected. Someone was looking for this family, and their intentions were clearly not benevolent. The priest looked back at the mother cat, who was watching him with desperate hope, trusting him to protect what she couldn't protect on her own. For 23 years, Father Murphy had offered sanctuary to anyone who needed it. He had hidden undocumented workers from immigration raids, had sheltered domestic violence victims from abusive partners, had provided safe haven for anyone who came to his door seeking protection. But he had never faced a situation quite like this, where the innocent were so small, so helpless, and the threat felt so immediate and personal. The truck's engine revved once, a sound that carried clearly through the night air. Then slowly it began to move, circling the church building like a predator, testing the boundaries of its territory. Father Murphy watched the headlights sweep across the stained glass windows, casting moving shadows across the sanctuary where the cat family huddled in their makeshift nest. He made his decision. Moving quickly and quietly, Father Murphy gathered the mother cat and her kittens, wrapping them carefully in the warmest blanket he could find. The old church had plenty of hiding places, secret spaces built during the Underground Railroad era that had been forgotten by most, but remembered by priests who understood that sanctuary was more than just a word. As he carried his precious cargo toward the basement, he heard the truck complete another circle of the building. But this time it didn't leave. This time it parked. And Father Murphy realized that the night was far from over. In the basement of St. Mary's Church, surrounded by boxes of Christmas decorations and old hymnals, Father Murphy created a nest for the cat family behind the old coal furnace, a space that had once hidden runaway slaves and would now shelter different victims of human cruelty. The mother cat seemed to understand the need for silence. She settled into the improvised bed without a sound, her kittens pressed close against her warmth. Father Murphy had just finished arranging water and food dishes when he heard it, the distinct sound of footsteps on the church porch above. Heavy boots, moving with the confidence of someone who believed they had every right to be there. The footsteps paused at the main entrance, and then came the sound that made the priest's blood run cold. Someone testing the door handle. The mother cat's ears flattened against her head, and she began to silently hyperventilate, her mouth open in a soundless pant of pure terror. Her reaction told Father Murphy everything he needed to know about who was outside his church at midnight. The footsteps moved around the building, testing each entrance. Father Murphy climbed the basement stairs as quietly as possible and peered through a small window near the side door. In the dim light from the street lamp, he could see a figure moving systematically around the church perimeter, someone who clearly knew the building's layout. The man was tall, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face, but there was something familiar about his posture. Father Murphy's heart sank as recognition dawned. He knew that walk, had seen it every Sunday for the past 3 months. The man outside his church was Dale Brennan, a newcomer to Cedar Falls, who had started attending services with his wife and teenage daughter. Dale had always made Father Murphy slightly uncomfortable, though the priest had chalked it up to his own prejudices. The man was covered in tattoos, spoke with a rough manner, and had the kind of eyes that never seemed to smile even when his mouth did. But he had donated generously to the church roof fund, and his wife seemed genuinely devout. Father Murphy had told himself that everyone deserved a chance at redemption. Now, watching Dale systematically search the church grounds in the middle of the night, Father Murphy realized that his instincts had been tragically correct. The testing of doors and windows continued for nearly 20 minutes. Dale was methodical, patient, the behavior of someone accustomed to hunting. When he finally returned to his truck, Father Murphy thought the ordeal might be over. But instead of leaving, Dale pulled out his phone and made a call. Father Murphy couldn't hear the words, but the body language was unmistakable. Dale was frustrated, reporting back to someone that his search had been unsuccessful. The conversation lasted several minutes, and when it ended, Dale didn't start his truck. Instead, he settled back in his seat as if preparing for a long wait. He was going to watch the church all night. Father Murphy returned to the basement, where the cat family remained huddled in their hiding place. The mother cat looked up at him with those impossibly expressive eyes, and he saw in them a question that cut straight to his heart. Can you really protect us? Sitting cross-legged beside their makeshift nest, Father Murphy began to piece together what must have happened. The systematic abuse, the careful mutilation of the mother cat's fur, The way she had specifically sought sanctuary at a church, this wasn't random animal cruelty. This was something much more deliberate and twisted. Over the next few hours, as Dale maintained his vigil outside and the cat family slept fitfully in their hiding place, Father Murphy found himself remembering conversations from recent months. Dale's wife, Sarah, had mentioned their hobby of rescuing stray animals. She had spoken about it with an enthusiasm that seemed genuine, describing how they rehabilitated cats and dogs on their property outside town. But now Father Murphy remembered other details that hadn't seemed significant at the time. Sarah's defensive explanations when people asked about visiting their animal sanctuary. The way Dale had reacted with anger when someone mentioned calling animal control about strays in the area. The expensive equipment in their truck that Sarah had claimed was for medical care of the animals they rescued. As dawn began to filter through the small basement windows, Father Murphy realized he was looking at something far worse than simple animal abuse. The mother cat's condition, the systematic nature of her injuries, the terror in her response to Dale's presence, all of it pointed to something that made him physically sick to contemplate. Some people, he had learned in his years of ministry, were beyond redemption. Some darkness was so complete that it couldn't be touched by light, no matter how bright, and some evil dressed itself up as charity to avoid detection. The mother cat stirred, perhaps sensing the change in light or the intensity of Father Murphy's thoughts. She looked up at him, and in that moment, he made her a promise that he intended to keep no matter the cost. "You're safe now," he whispered. "Whatever they did to you, wherever they took you from, that's over. You're home now." But even as he spoke the words, Father Murphy knew that Dale Brennan hadn't given up. Men like that never gave up when they believed something belonged to them, and from the careful, methodical way Dale had searched the church grounds, it was clear he intended to get his property back. What would Father Murphy be willing to sacrifice to stop him? The answer would test everything he believed about mercy, justice, and the true meaning of sanctuary. Because some battles, Father Murphy was beginning to understand, couldn't be won with prayers alone. Outside, Dale's truck continued its patient watch, and the morning brought no sense of safety, only the terrible certainty that this was far from over. By 7 in the morning, Dale's truck was gone, but Father Murphy felt no relief. Men like Dale didn't simply give up. They regrouped, planned, waited for better opportunities. The priest had spent the sleepless night researching on his laptop, and what he had discovered made his hands shake with rage. The animal sanctuary that Dale and Sarah Brennan operated was nothing of the sort. Using carefully worded searches and cross-referencing news reports from neighboring counties, Father Murphy had uncovered a pattern of missing pets, reports of animal abuse that never quite led to charges, and complaints from neighbors about strange sounds coming from the Brennan property at night. But it was the deep web forum he had stumbled across that revealed the true horror. The Brennans weren't just abusing animals. They were part of a network that traded in torture videos, that treated living creatures as nothing more than props for the entertainment of people whose humanity had rotted away from the inside. The mother cat's injuries weren't random. They were signatures, markers that identified the work of specific abusers in this underground community. Father Murphy had to step away from his computer twice to vomit as he read descriptions of what these people did to animals, how they ranked and rated each other's cruelty, how they shared techniques for maximizing suffering while keeping victims alive as long as possible. The mother cat had escaped from hell itself. Around noon, Sarah Brennan appeared at the church door with a casserole and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Father Murphy had known she would come. It was the perfect cover, the concerned parishioner checking on her priest after a stormy night. "Good afternoon, Father," she said, her voice carrying its usual note of artificial sweetness. "I brought you some of my famous tuna casserole. Dale mentioned he saw lights on late at the church last night and wanted to make sure everything was all right." Father Murphy accepted the casserole with steady hands, though his stomach turned at the mention of tuna. He had fed the mother cat some of his own sandwich meat that morning, and she had eaten with the desperate hunger of someone who hadn't seen real food in weeks. "Just some late-night administrative work," he replied, studying Sarah's face. "You know how it is. Paperwork never sleeps." Sarah's laugh was too loud, too long. Dale was worried someone might be trying to break in. There's been so much crime lately, even in small towns like ours, people taking things that don't belong to them. The emphasis on the last words wasn't subtle, and Father Murphy felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't a social visit. This was a message. Sarah knew exactly why her husband had been watching the church, and she was here to deliver an ultimatum disguised as neighborly concern. "I appreciate Dale's watchfulness," Father Murphy said carefully, "though I can't imagine what anyone would want to steal from a small country church." "Oh, you'd be surprised," Sarah replied, her smile becoming even more artificial. "Some people get very attached to their pets, for instance. They'll go to extraordinary lengths to get them back when they wander off." Father Murphy's grip on the casserole dish tightened. "I haven't seen any stray animals around here lately." "That's good to hear," Sarah said, but her eyes were scanning the interior of the church visible behind him. "Dale has such a soft spot for strays, especially cats. He gets very upset when they disappear without a trace. Sometimes he can't sleep at night, wondering what happened to them." The conversation was a careful dance of threats and denials, each participant understanding exactly what the other meant while maintaining the facade of pleasant small talk. But Father Murphy had been dealing with dangerous people longer than Sarah realized, and he knew how to end conversations that had served their purpose. "Well, I should let you get back to your day," he said, beginning to close the door. "Thank you again for the casserole." Sarah's hand shot out to hold the door open, and for just a moment her mask slipped entirely. The sweetness drained from her expression, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "Father," she said quietly, "if you ever do come across any stray animals, you should call us immediately. Dale and I are much better equipped to handle them than most people realize. We have special facilities, specialized knowledge. We know how to take care of animals that other people might find difficult." The threat was unmistakable now, delivered in a voice that carried no pretense of friendliness. Father Murphy looked directly into Sarah's eyes and saw the same absence of human compassion that he had recognized in her husband. "I'll certainly keep that in mind," he replied evenly. "Have a blessed day, Sarah." As soon as she was gone, Father Murphy locked the door and rushed to the basement. The mother cat lifted her head as he approached, and he could swear she was asking him what had happened. The encounter with Sarah had confirmed his worst fears, but it had also crystallized his resolve. That afternoon, Father Murphy made phone calls that he had never expected to make. He contacted animal welfare organizations, spoke with law enforcement officers in neighboring counties, and reached out to investigative journalists who specialized in exposing animal abuse networks. He learned about evidence collection, about the legal requirements for building cases against organized animal cruelty operations, and about the dangerous game he was about to enter. But most importantly, he learned that he wasn't alone. There were people fighting this kind of evil every day, and they were very interested in what he had discovered about the Brennan's operation. Detective Maria Santos from the County Sheriff's Department was especially intrigued when Father Murphy described the mother cat's condition and the systematic nature of her injuries. She had been tracking reports of missing pets for months, building a case that had stalled for lack of concrete evidence. "Father," she said during their phone conversation, "what you're describing could be the break we've been looking for. But I need you to understand, these people are dangerous. If they realize you're involved with law enforcement, they won't hesitate to escalate." Father Murphy looked down at the mother cat, who had begun to trust him enough to purr when he approached. She was still painfully thin, still jumped at unexpected sounds, but she was healing. Her kittens were growing stronger every day, and she had begun to play with them. Brief moments of joy that reminded him why this fight was worth the risk. "Detective," he said quietly, "they already know I'm involved. The only question now is whether we can stop them before they hurt anyone else." As evening approached, Father Murphy prepared for another long night. Dale's truck hadn't returned, but the priest knew better than to assume he was safe. People like the Brennans were patient, methodical. They would wait for the perfect opportunity to reclaim what they believed belonged to them. But Father Murphy was no longer the same man who had found a crying cat on his church steps just 24 hours earlier. He had seen true evil, and he had made his choice about which side he would stand on. The mother cat seemed to sense the change in him. As he settled into the chair beside her nest for another night of watching and waiting, she did something she had never done before. She reached out and touched his hand with her paw, a gesture of trust and partnership that felt like a benediction. Together they would face whatever came next. The confrontation came 3 days later, not with the stealth Father Murphy had expected, but with the confidence of people who believed they were above consequence. Dale and Sarah Brennan arrived at St. Mary's on Sunday afternoon, after the last service had ended and the congregation had gone home to their family dinners and quiet afternoons. Father Murphy was in the sanctuary, straightening hymnals and preparing for evening vespers, when he heard the heavy footsteps on the porch. He didn't need to look up to know who it was. The mother cat in the basement had begun to pace restlessly an hour earlier, some instinct telling her that danger was approaching. Dale entered first, his bulk filling the doorway like a storm cloud. Sarah followed, her artificial smile more strained than usual. Between them walked their teenage daughter, a thin girl with haunted eyes who kept glancing nervously at her parents. "Father Murphy," Dale said, his voice carrying a tone of forced joviality. "Beautiful service this morning. Really spoke to the heart." "Thank you, Dale," the priest replied, continuing to stack hymnals without looking up. "I'm surprised to see you all back so soon." "Well," Sarah interjected, "we have a small problem we were hoping you could help us with." Father Murphy finally looked up, and what he saw in Dale's eyes made his blood freeze. This wasn't the careful probing of their earlier encounters. This was a man who had decided that subtlety was no longer necessary. "Our cat got loose a few days ago," Dale continued, moving closer to the altar. "Very special cat, part of our breeding program. Worth quite a bit of money, you understand. We know she's here," Sarah added, abandoning all pretense. "Dale saw you carrying something into the church that night. We just want our property back." The word property hung in the air like a curse. Father Murphy set down the hymnals and faced the family fully, drawing strength from the sacred space around him. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about," he said evenly. Dale's face darkened. "Don't play games with us, priest. We know what we saw. That cat belongs to us and we want her back, along with whatever she was carrying." "The kittens," Sarah clarified, her voice sharp with demand. "She had kittens. They're ours too." It was the daughter who broke the stalemate. She had been standing silently between her parents, but suddenly she stepped forward, her young face contorted with an emotion that Father Murphy recognized as desperate courage. "Don't give them back," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the vast sanctuary. "Please, you don't know what they do." Dale's reaction was immediate and violent. His hand shot out to grab his daughter's arm, but she ducked away with the practiced reflexes of someone accustomed to avoiding blows. "Shut your mouth, Emma," Sarah hissed. "You don't know what you're talking about." But Emma was crying now, years of suppressed horror finally finding voice. "I know what you do in the basement. I know what happens to the animals that wander off. I've seen the videos you make." The confession hung in the air like a physical presence. Father Murphy felt pieces clicking into place. The girl's haunted expressions during services, the way she flinched whenever her parents moved too quickly, the desperate way she had looked at him during prayers. Emma wasn't just witnessing her parents' cruelty, she was their next victim in training. "Emma," Father Murphy said gently, extending his hand toward the girl. "Come here." She moved toward him like someone crossing a minefield, every step requiring tremendous courage. Dale started to follow, but Father Murphy's voice stopped him cold. "Another step and I call the police." Dale laughed, but it was the sound of someone whose mask had finally fallen away completely. "You think anyone will believe you? We're upstanding members of this community, contributors to your church. What are you? A washed-up priest in a dying parish who's probably going senile?" "Maybe," Father Murphy acknowledged, "but Detective Santos has been very interested in our conversations. She's particularly curious about the videos Emma mentioned." The change in Dale and Sarah was instantaneous. The artificial friendliness vanished, replaced by the cold calculation of predators who suddenly realized they might be the ones being hunted. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," Sarah said, her voice low and dangerous. "This goes much deeper than you understand. We have protection, connections you can't imagine." "And we have evidence," Father Murphy replied. "The cat you're looking for has been examined by a veterinarian. Her injuries have been documented. The systematic nature of the abuse has been recorded. It was a bluff. He hadn't dared take the mother cat to a vet for fear of discovery, but it was a bluff delivered with the conviction of absolute truth. And from the way Dale and Sarah exchanged glances, he knew they believed him. Emma had reached Father Murphy's side, and he placed a protective hand on her shoulder. She was trembling, but she looked up at him with the same expression of desperate hope that he had first seen in the mother cat's eyes. "There's something else you should know," Father Murphy continued, drawing strength from the girl's courage. "This church has a long history of providing sanctuary to those who need it. That tradition continues today." The sound of sirens in the distance punctuated his words. Father Murphy had made one more call that morning, and Detective Santos had been very interested in having a conversation with the Brennan family. Dale and Sarah turned toward the sound, their faces showing the first real fear Father Murphy had seen from them. They looked back at the priest with expressions of pure hatred. "This isn't over," Dale growled. "Yes," Father Murphy replied quietly. "It is." As the police cars pulled into the church parking lot, Emma began to cry. Not tears of fear, but tears of relief so profound they seemed to come from her soul. Father Murphy kept his hand on her shoulder, feeling the weight of responsibility and the lightness of grace intertwining in his chest. In the basement, the mother cat lifted her head, as if sensing that some fundamental change had occurred in the world above. Her kittens, now stronger and more playful, tumbled around her in their safe nest. She looked toward the stairs, as if she knew that the shadows that had haunted her were finally lifting. The arrests took hours. The investigation that followed would take months. But that evening, as Father Murphy sat in the basement watching Emma gently pet the mother cat while the kittens played at their feet, he understood that he had witnessed something miraculous. The mother cat had brought more than just her babies to his church that stormy night. She had brought a young girl's chance at salvation, an opportunity for justice, and a reminder that sanctuary meant more than just safe walls. It meant the courage to stand between the innocent and those who would destroy them. Later that night, as Emma slept safely in the church rectory and the cat family rested peacefully in their basement sanctuary, Father Murphy stood in his empty church and spoke a prayer of thanksgiving. The stained glass windows caught the moonlight, casting patterns of colored light across the pews where his small congregation gathered each Sunday. Tomorrow, there would be new challenges. The investigation into the Brennan's operation would require his testimony. Emma would need counseling, legal protection, and a new home with people who understood that love meant safety, not pain. The mother cat and her kittens would need permanent homes with families who would cherish them. But tonight, in the quiet sanctuary of St. Mary's Church, Father Murphy understood that grace worked in mysterious ways. Sometimes it came in the form of desperate prayers answered. Sometimes it came in the courage to do what was right, even when it was dangerous. And sometimes it came on four paws, crying in the rain, asking for nothing more than a chance to protect the innocent. That night, Father Murphy whispered to the empty church, she didn't just save her kittens. She saved us all. The mother cat, as if she had heard him from the basement below, released one soft meow. Not a cry of despair this time, but a sound of contentment, trust, and hope. In the quiet that followed, Father Murphy could swear he heard the sound of healing beginning.